Silent Hill is a survival horror franchise that doesn't need an introduction. It's been known by many to have shaped our childhood, from its otherworldly design, which builds this nightmarish atmosphere, when knee-deep in the horrors of the haunting otherworld, to then possess the capabilities like no other survival horror franchise out there, to suddenly incorporate this dreamlike quality with its calming and soothing tones of ambient music, making you feel lost in this never-ending dream you're experiencing and can't wake up from. So much attention to detail hidden within its gameplay that oozes with so much charm, passion, and love from those who developed it once upon a time. Well, it just so happens I want to revisit that foggy little town once again, but this time a bit differently. Instead of revisiting a previous mainline entry that's been talked about to death by many before me and most likely after me, I want to cover some very obscure games that adopt the Silent Hill name, which I imagine no one has ever heard of before, and for a good reason. Today, I'll be delving into Silent Hill fan games that predate back to the 2000s, seeing fans incorporate their own creative and unique ideas into becoming a reality, spanning from mainline entries in the style of a Demake for the Game Boy, a proof-of-concept remake of a mainline entry through the lens of modern gameplay, even some downright weird ones that have nothing to do with Silent Hill's gameplay design we are accustomed to, and adopt other pre-existing game engines that somehow make it work with the aesthetic of Silent Hill. So, if you will, join me today as we once again take a trip down memory lane by walking through the thick, layered fog, and slowly uncover the wild world of Silent Hill fan games. Have you ever thought to yourself, what if we did get a Silent Hill 1 as a remake instead of Silent Hill 2 remake? Well, luckily for those who were severely disappointed, we did get a chance to see what Silent Hill 1 could look like as a remake. A fully interactive and playable demo of the beginning introduction to Silent Hill 1. In gameplay, we get a first-person perspective of Harry driving in his Jeep along with Cheryl in the passenger seat. You can also hear the main theme, Silent Hill, playing in the background as if Harry is listening to the song on the radio. It eventually shows Sybil driving on her motorcycle and driving off into the night, which comes to an end when Harry crashes into Alessa's spiritual manifestation, as expected, kicking off the events of the game. Once Harry awakens from the car crash, you are fully immersed in the foggy town of Silent Hill. It's honestly so bizarre to see the beginning in the first-person perspective since we are accustomed to the third-person camera angle. Having this shift in perspective changes how we see the general surroundings in such a drastic way. You yourself feel like you are in the role of Harry Mason, wandering aimlessly through this thick fog that obscures everything around you, forcing you to venture into the unknown of this lonely, isolated little town. However, I will say that you aren't allowed to explore all of it as it locks the player out from entering out of bounds with an invisible wall, so there aren't many options, unfortunately, to explore at your own leisure. You eventually follow the same path you recognize by memory to find Cheryl and chase after her, running through the neighborhood in this long liminal street, then stumble upon the back alleys. You hear the siren that blares its horn loudly to signify the shift to the otherworld, giving you the lighter as the only viable solution as a light source. The walk through this back alley feels incredibly claustrophobic because of how tight the walls feel close to each other, building this dark and foreboding atmosphere with how much depth there is in the darkness. You generally can't see anything in front of you, which creates even more of this fear and vulnerability. Finally, we find the hanged corpse on the fence with the gray child stabbing you to where you pass out, and then the demo ends. Surprisingly, it was very well done in just 10 minutes of this concept demo. It was atmospheric and immersive, from the shift of a third-person to a first-person perspective. I initially thought it was an odd decision, as most modern remakes, at least adapting classic survival horror games in the genre, still stay faithful with the third-person over-the-shoulder camera angle. But having the first-person camera angle feels more personal, creating this unsettling and creepy atmosphere that fits perfectly in Silent Hill. I have no clue if we will ever get an eventual remake of Silent Hill 1, but this is probably the closest we will ever get to one. If you thought seeing a Silent Hill 1 remake was hard to believe, then you best believe that someone went out of their way to make a Silent Hill 1 Demake. What you see is a recreation of Silent Hill 1's opening, where you once again assume the role of Harry Mason, waking up in Silent Hill after his fatal car crash where he has to find Cheryl. It mostly covers the introduction, where you explore the town to roam around and eventually find yourself in the back alleys, where you get killed by the Grey Child, waking up once again in the cafe 522 with Sybil with the exact word-for-word dialogue you'd find in the original game, and explore the town once more to find Cheryl's whereabouts. In terms of gameplay, there isn't much depth as you should expect, since the gameplay controls are very limited, and the same applies to the limitations of the Game Boy's hardware as well. But given what the developer, HPL_Ben, used when it came to adapting the gameplay mechanics, it's faithful to say the least. After Sybil gives you the pistol, you go through the scripted cutscene with the air screamer, killing it upon receiving the pocket radio. You can also save your game and collect health items if you want, although it's pretty mundane, as for one, the game never explains how to use health or if there is an inventory screen you can go to check your items, and two, it's a 10-minute demo that is very short and not at all difficult. Once in town, you basically just roam down the streets to kill the occasional air screamer and groaner with a pistol, which isn't difficult as you have unlimited ammo in your pistol. Eventually, you find the key to the doghouse and then go into the house where the demo ends. Again, I want to not repeat myself like a broken record, but the demo is fairly short and mostly a concept of what a Silent Hill 1 could look like on the Game Boy, in the essence of a Demake. It's a neat idea, and I can't wait to show you the many Demakes fans have made along the way. As opposed to the previous Silent Hill 1 Demake, this is a fully playable recreation of the original Silent Hill 2, made specifically for the Game Boy. I am not joking when I say this. The developer in question, Stormer Games, took it upon himself to recreate the entirety of Silent Hill 2 because he was experimenting with Game Boy Studio, a free-to-download program that allows you to build and create your own Game Boy game, and he decided, on a whim, to remake Silent Hill 2. Surprisingly, this went under the radar for me because I honestly had no idea this even existed until I did research on this video. Apparently, the development started partially because of Silent Hill 2's 20th anniversary, but mostly due in part to not having his PS2 to play Silent Hill 2 for himself. So he decided to make a Game Boy version of it for him and others to enjoy for free. He had to watch walkthroughs to recreate everything you see from scratch. Honestly, he did such an outstanding job at capturing every meticulous detail down to the core that is seen in the original game, such as the opening scene of James's monologue where he recites Mary's letter. The music that accompanies it, although compressed due to the Game Boy's hardware limitations, sounds authentic to the original music piece. You also have an inventory that incorporates everything when it comes to the items that you use throughout the game, such as health, weapons, miscellaneous items, etc. Furthermore, you eventually come to find that even the cutscenes play exactly how you expect them to, just in an 8-bit art style with the dialogue reciting word for word what the characters say to each other, such as James meeting Angela for the first time in the cemetery, or when James stumbles into the town of Silent Hill to find the lying figure, creating this tension with this slow build-up to the eventual resolution where you end up fighting it. Obviously, it doesn't have that same execution you'd experience in the original game, but the amount of creativity expressed here with such limitations to incorporate that similar experience is something I appreciate in its detail. There is lots of depth within each environment you see throughout this remake, and it's honestly hard to believe that Konami themselves didn't develop this, let alone one person. It's believable enough to envision this in an alternate timeline where Silent Hill 2 wasn't just ported to the Xbox and PC, but also to the Game Boy. I could see myself in my youth as a kid, going on a road trip with my family and deciding to take a Game Boy with me and play all of Silent Hill 2 for the long road ahead. Truly, this is a phenomenal remake that I can't stop thinking about, even as I'm writing this script. It just makes me want to replay it once again. That's how great it is. I would love to talk more about this little hidden gem, but I'm gonna leave it to you to play it and experience it yourself. Also, Pyramid alone is worth playing this. He looks so derpy and adorable. I love it. Silent Hill 3 is yet another Demake, although this time, not in the graphical art style of a Game Boy, but rather reminiscent of a Flash game from the early to late 2000s. It's very basic at best when it comes to its overall controls. Simply use the A or D keys to move header left or right, and hold down the left mouse button to fire the Uzi machine gun. That's all there really is to this minimalistic gameplay design. But I would be lying to you if it didn't invoke a little nostalgia into me, or reminded me of when I was a little kid, wasting half of my day by going onto the family laptop to play these 2D Flash games. The pixel art seen here is surprisingly very well done. It captures, to its best efforts, the environments seen in Silent Hill 3, such as the Nightmare amusement park, the mall, the subway station, and finally, the town of Silent Hill. You can tell that the developer knew what they were doing and making the best out of their efforts to realize the atmosphere into a 2D Flash game. The designs for the numbody and the double head look spot on, with the details in their pixel art. This Robbie the Rabbit that you typically see upon starting the game that sits there dead on the bench gives this sense of an ominous presence. The same is captured here with Robbie's pixel art, although it's more unsettling to me. Heather's pixel artwork shows signs of wear and lack of polish compared to the rest of the design seen in the gameplay. It's decent at best, but it's more than made up for the fact that you're equipped with the Uzi and just relentlessly spraying the enemies with bullets. It's purely a filler game that is meant to capture the atmosphere of Silent Hill 3, albeit condensed into a 5-minute Flash game to waste your time with until you get bored. It's nothing too complex in terms of adapting an actual remake for a pre-existing console, like the Game Boy remakes before it, but it has charm and passion instilled into it. Possibly one of the most bizarre fan games on the list has got to be Silent Hill 2.5. This fan game is very similar to the Silent Hill remake concept demo, as you have a first-person perspective while in gameplay. The difference here is that you have all the freedom to explore Silent Hill, at least from what I played, the first half of Southdale. Silent Hill 2.5 sees the player play as Heather Mason. According to the synopsis, this takes place directly after Silent Hill 3, where Heather ends up coming back to Silent Hill once again to meet up with James Sunderland. While here, the player is tasked to roam around the foggy town to collect 6 of the Robbie the Rabbit bunnies placed in separate locations across the town. While exploring, you have to avoid the enemies from Silent Hill 3, which comprise the Closer, Doublehead, and the Numbody. As you collect each Robbie the Rabbit, the difficulty will increase as the quantity of the enemies will see more spawn, growing in numbers, and the day will slowly get darker, which makes navigation more difficult to progress. You also, for some reason, have these player stats that correlate to your health, stamina, and the amount of time you have left remaining. This was by far the weirdest decision to put into the gameplay. The health, I understand, as it's only common knowledge in any survival horror game, or really, any video game in general. But as to why there is a stamina meter and a time limit, it is beyond me. I suppose this is here to increase the difficulty that will handicap the player if they don't learn to evade the enemies, or learn the map layout to navigate properly so they have a higher chance of finding the Robbie the Rabbit and not running out of time. But here's the problem. For some unknown reason, the controls are bizarrely mishandled in terms of their assigning to the keyboard layout. When you move around with the keyboard and mouse, you typically use the A, S, D, F keys to move and the mouse to look around. The mouse is fine when it comes to looking around the environment, but the movement is assigned incorrectly to the arrow keys, which are on the right side of the keyboard. To make matters worse, there isn't an option in the menu to properly configure your control bindings for some reason. So throughout the entire playthrough, I had to awkwardly have both of my hands side by side when using the mouse and keyboard controls. I'm embarrassed to say that it took me an hour to figure out how to navigate around the town to find all 6 of the Robbie the Rabbit bunnies. I felt like I knew the entire town layout like the back of my hand as I played Silent Hill 2 many times before. But after numerous deaths, I guess this isn't the case. I will argue that the timer doesn't help progression in making it easier to finish, as its time limit is too low. Under 2 minutes to have the accessibility to traverse around, as well as the awkward tight spaces you come to find while in the alleys, where you then have this haunting image of an army of Silent Hill 3 monsters walking menacingly towards you. But somehow, after an hour of playtime in what should be a short demo, I finally found all of the Robbie the Rabbit bunnies. After this happens, the memory of Alessa character model spawns, which is supposed to be a guide of sorts to the player, I'm assuming. But in the most anticlimactic turns of events, through the gate, you find a wall blocking you from passing into the tunnel. All you get is a word of text that reads, "Door next town leads to test 3 spawn_1, which left me dumbfounded. This means that I wasted an hour trying to finish the fan game, which led to what I'm assuming is a work in progress portion of the fan game, which isn't in this update. After doing more investigation into the fan game, I noticed that it hadn't been updated since 2015, making that almost a decade of inactivity a year from now. It's safe to say that it looks like this fan game won't be getting a proper update anytime soon. However, there are devlogs showing footage of the developer playing in other areas of the town, such as the forest, after leaving the observatory deck, which would then lead to the cemetery, Read Me Angela. It seems that they probably ported the entire map from the PS2 somehow, which is technical wizardry in itself, that I don't understand. There is also VR support, that allows you to experience the game through the lens of a VR headset, which is wild to think about. Overall, it's a very bizarre fan game that I never would have ever imagined being a possibility, but it goes to show the lengths fans would go to make their weird and imaginative ideas come to life. Have you ever woke up one day and thought to yourself, I wish there was a Silent Hill game where you could play as Robbie the Rabbit? No? Well, me neither, but in this Silent Hill fan game, you can do just that. For those who are Robbie the Rabbit purists who love that pink, stuffed plush mascot, you can now play as him. This Silent Hill fan game follows Robbie the Rabbit as he is sent out on a job to do a specific task. As to what that is, well, we don't really know, as the objective is very mysterious. But more on that later. You will find yourself primarily in this hallway with 3 doors leading to each room and 3 tarot cards needed to complete a ritual. In terms of gameplay, there isn't much to gloss over. You mostly just navigate the environment and explore each room, which typically has a puzzle that, if I'm being honest, I had no idea exactly how to solve. Like most Silent Hill puzzles in the games, there are only 2 puzzles, one with this weird amalgamation of a monster hanging upside down, accompanied by 3 other statues. You press this remote, which I'm assuming is required for them to be all facing in a general direction, which then saw me get the tarot card. The other one is a locker combination that I have no idea how I even managed to solve, as I just pressed random numbers on the keypad, and I, out of dumb luck, managed to get the tarot card. The other one is located in this mattress padded room that really doesn't have a puzzle, just a newspaper to read. After acquiring all 3 tarot cards, you get this cutscene where Robbie the Rabbit finds a gun and a note, transitioning to him walking in Silent Hill in the alleyway where James would find Laura, then taking the subway to Heather's apartment complex. Out of the blue, you hear this ominous and loud gunshot fire in the distance. This implies that Robbie the Rabbit was assigned to assassinate Heather Mason, assumingly, considering the camera shot of her apartment, which is, well, very dark and haunting to think about. But that's about it from this weird and odd Silent Hill fan game. I guess it was cool to play as Robbie the Rabbit, and it does make me think how fun of an idea it would be to have some sort of spin-off where you play as him, even if it is a minigame featuring him and not as the main character. Although dark in its implications, it's still an interesting idea, and manages to tackle the question that I imagine no one had in the back of their mind. What if you could play as Robbie the Rabbit? If there is one thing I love about mods, it's typically combining that mod with a pre-existing game and converging it with a game that has no relation to the franchise whatsoever, and somehow making two elements that shouldn't work together end up working. The same could be said with this fan game here, called Silent Hill Abyss Lord. It uses the Wolfenstein 3D engine to combine the likes of Silent Hill 2's atmosphere to create this oddity of a game. In terms of its story, it follows James Sunderland as he explores the holes that he jumps through, ending in a different part of his mind that sees the horrors of the Silent Hill 2 monsters chasing after you to kill you from escaping. It seems to be a running joke in this game about James jumping through holes, which I'm assuming is based on him jumping through the holes from a segment in the later half of the original game. Within this gameplay, it's basically Wolfenstein 3D or Doom in terms of its gameplay design. In these older games, you typically are accompanied by a firearm or a melee weapon, using them against the various enemies scattered across the rooms that you shoot at relentlessly with your guns. Since it's a very old engine, there isn't much depth to the atmosphere due to the limitations of the hardware, having you mostly explore in these box-like rooms. However, given the limitations, it seems that the developer put a lot of thought and effort into making this otherworld design similar to that of Silent Hill 2. We have the lying figures, mannequins, and the nurses, having to combat them with either the pistol or pipe, which, if I'm being honest, I did not find myself using the pipe as I grew attached to the pistol. The pistol is the best weapon, as it has the most damage output and allows for a range between enemies, as they deal surprisingly lots of damage quickly. The enemies aren't difficult per se, they are more of an annoyance as they are large in quantity and move fairly quickly. It's hard to take them seriously as a threat though, because they're rendered in 2D JPEG images that look hilarious to look at as they waddle over to you. Over time though, I realized you can just avoid them and collect all the essential items needed to finish the level. There is a nice little tribute when it comes to Silent Hill in terms of references, such as Mary's outfit, which gives you the pipe, a comically large portrait image of Angela, depressed and lying down, the various Robbie the Rabbits you have to shoot and collect to finish the level, I presume. You get the idea. Other than that, that's about it for this game. It's just kind of there, if I'm being honest. It's interesting, to say the least, to see a conversion mod with Wolfenstein 3D or Doom's engine being used as a tribute to Silent Hill 2 as a fan game. Those are two things I never would have possibly imagined being together, yet here we are. Silent Hill The Pledge has an interesting scenario where you play as the mailman, Howard Blackwood, a recurring character you find within Silent Hill Downpour who mysteriously appears every now and then when playing as Murphy. Well, in this fan game, we have the ability to assume the role of Howard and play him through his own prequel story. It tells the events of how he found his way to Silent Hill through his perspective. It's in fairness an interesting idea, but so odd of a character to choose to make the main focus, when there is barely any relevancy to his character in Silent Hill Downpour. I even forgot he existed. In this demo, you have to roam around the apartment to find notes that contain hidden clues that correlate to this locker puzzle, which you have to figure out to access a key to unlock the door in front of you, I'm assuming. I say this because the game decided to break and stop functioning for some reason, as I was controlling the mouse cursor during this puzzle. I couldn't pull my mouse cursor to the bottom of the screen as the game wouldn't allow me, and I decided to restart the demo to hopefully counter this issue in the gameplay again. And as luck would have it, I unfortunately, once again, got the same result when trying to solve this locker puzzle. I have no idea as to why this was happening, and so I thought maybe there was an update that maybe solved this bug issue. So I went back to the website, but there are only 3 files on the page to download, and the last time this fan game was updated was over 10 years ago. With this in mind, all hope was lost as I just gave up after this. It's a shame because this seemed to be an interesting premise to explore a mysterious character who could have some spotlight shed on him. Unfortunately, it seems that tale will never unfold. For a bit of a history lesson, Silent Hill The Escape is a previously seen spin-off in the Silent Hill franchise. primarily released on mobile phones, incorporating first-person shooter gameplay mechanics where you play in a dungeon crawler atmosphere, moving in one of 4 directions as you scale through tight linear hallways in this labyrinth of a maze. The objective is to find keys in these mazes throughout 10 levels while avoiding or killing the monsters to escape. Most of the monsters seen here are iconic figures from the franchise, such as the Bubblehead Nurses, but also never before seen monsters, such as these possessed wheelchair apparitions, hanging ceiling creatures, or the stalker enemy that closely resembles that of Pyramid Head. This is by far one of the most obscure Silent Hill games in the franchise, along with many others, which are spin-offs that aren't very well known either, but that's for another day. The point is that Silent Hill: The Escape is an obscure game that graciously got a fan remake for PC. From my understanding, it incorporates all the elements that were comprised in the original mobile game and adapted to the PC, recreated from the ground up, using the keyboard keys to move and the mouse to aim and reload while killing enemies. Surprisingly, it feels very smooth and natural, a quality of life improvement compared to the controls of the original, considering that mobile phones back in the day used buttons that didn't have much versatility when aiming. Here, it feels like a match made in heaven with these mouse and keyboard controls. The environments, while very basic and similar in their structure, still warrant this tension, as most of the time, the atmosphere can be very dark and hollow to where the player cannot see what is in front of them, creating this anxiety for when they do eventually encounter a monster unexpectedly. As I was getting used to the gameplay mechanics and gaining this understanding of finding a key, avoiding anything in my path while running through the corridors in hopes of not encountering an enemy gave me lots of dread and stakes. The idea of incorporating tight linear levels with monsters that build in numbers while having to find a key to escape is very basic in concept that isn't new, but the creation of that build-up is what keeps you compelled to the gameplay, making it worthwhile. And once you do eventually get to the exit, you feel this overwhelming wave of relief. It makes not only good horror, but also good replay value, especially if you want to perfect your overall rank throughout each consecutive level. It's cathartic to believe someone just woke up one day and decided to remake an obscure and forgotten Silent Hill spin-off from a device that was only available to people on those of mobile devices. Ironically, this opportunity for millions to download the game would end up finding out not even knowing of its existence. Regardless, I think it's really cool that fans have either ported or remade these unavailable Silent Hill games to the general public, especially for free. I recommend you check out Silent Hill: The Escape fan remake, as it's a good time waster, but a game you can finally experience. One of the many things I've always wanted to do in the Silent Hill games was to have the ability to explore the entire town of Silent Hill. Technically, you have the ability to explore the foggy town that features it in each game. Still, it's very limited due to its draw distance being obscured by its fog, the streets having a vast abyss that forces you to find an alternate path, or the many monsters that plague the city streets of the town itself that you have to fight off or run away from, which disturbs this peace of walking the town at your own leisure. However, this all changed with this fan game called My Silent Walk. That wish to explore Silent Hill without any monsters or obstacles that obstruct our path is now a dream come true. The entire map of Silent Hill from Silent Hill 1 is ported to the Unreal Engine, which removes the fog and the monsters and instead replaces the ominous atmosphere with a more peaceful and relaxing one, with a bright blue sky in the daytime. It weirdly makes the town more alive more than ever. You can see locations such as the Konami Burger, Midwish Elementary, or Cafe 5-2. All locations are familiar to anyone who played this game, albeit unavailable to enter into the interior buildings itself, unfortunately. But still, a spectacle to witness. From just standing on the opposite end of the town and looking at the streets, it's insane to see how long the streets protrude from one end of the town to the other. It gives the town far more depth than initially with the fog. You feel so tiny and vulnerable in comparison with how massive the sheer size of the map is. I found myself lost in exploring everything that I possibly could. That made me giddy, like a little kid on Christmas, getting the present I wanted, that being the ability to explore Silent Hill. There isn't much else in this fan game to do other than to explore the town itself. But the fact that you can do this at your own leisure, without the monsters or the fog to limit your exploration, is a novelty. I spent a good hour just getting lost in exploring the town of Silent Hill, and would have loved to explore other maps featured in the game, or really, exploring other parts of town, like the one from Silent Hill 2. If you wish to explore Silent Hill, then those restless dreams of seeing that town are now a reality. Silent Hill Alchemilla is a widely known fan game that was quite popular back then upon its first initial release in 2015. It's a fully developed game using the source engine from Half-Life 2 as a mod to create a unique and distinct atmosphere to flesh out the story, gameplay, and overall presentation. I actually made a video on Silent Hill Alchemilla last year in December of 2023, so if you're interested in watching my coverage of the game itself, then I recommend you watch that video after watching this one. But I'll be brief with what I have to say, as I don't want to sound like a broken record. In Silent Hill Alchemilla, you play as an original character with his own backstory that heavily affects him to where he finds himself back in the foggy town of Silent Hill. The biggest influence is that of Alchemilla Hospital. Alchemilla plays a huge fundamental role in the narrative where you'll see yourself exploring the hospital in the fog world and otherworld, uncovering the mysterious messages revolving around the history of the protagonist and his overall involvement with the hospital itself, as well as puzzles that are surprisingly difficult, unfair even, to where it will make you toss and turn at night for failing to understand them. Exploration and puzzles are the key factors in gameplay. There will be many new locations that feel fresh and new, but also previously seen locations in universe of Silent Hill that give a bit of nostalgia for old-time players. However, there is a lack of combat against the monsters you'd find throughout each game, which does undermine the gameplay a bit, and loses that tension when creating that horror. However, this is made up with the consistency in the sound design that creates an entirely new and unique atmosphere with its own original soundtrack that keeps you allured to the tone and mood that creates the horror itself. There are a lot of creative liberties taken by one small development team, which shows lots of care and passion for paying tribute to Silent Hill's overall presentation and atmosphere, but also takes its own direction that still felt faithful to the material. It's an overall nice experience for any fan who wants to try something new, that feels familiar yet offers a completely different experience that would have you intrigued to keep playing and invested in wanting to uncover this rabbit hole you find yourself in. Okay, so I know I will sound like a broken record, because this will be the third time I talk about Silent Hill 1, and I imagine you are sick of it by now. But trust me, I discovered yet another Silent Hill 1 fan remake that is by far the highest in quality when conveying a modern survival horror experience, yet still pays tribute to the direction of the original Silent Hill 1. The many ideas this fan remake does that cement this seamless and engaging experience are a sight to behold, because this is possibly the closest we will ever get to an authentic Silent Hill 1 remake. But before I get ahead of myself, let's take it step by step and walk ourselves through this small demo that presents quite the journey for old veterans of the series and newcomers alike. The intro cutscene is the first difference that is a stark contrast compared to the original. We have an introduction to Harry Mason and his wife, Jodie Mason. It shows them at a gas station, refueling their tank as they head to the town of Silent Hill. Here it gives a bit of character development between the two that gives them more of a fleshed out personality, especially Jodie Mason, as we never see an interaction between her and Harry in the original, only in the opening FMV sequence. The writing here feels genuinely professional and takes close attention to creating an idea of what these two could ideally reflect when having this relationship with each other, that is hard to envision without much material to go off of from the original game. This in turn paints a loving and caring interaction between the two, showing them how much they love each other deeply, as you have to chase after Jodie when she hears a voice calling to her, which happens to be Cheryl. There is a bit of hesitancy on Harry's part when Jody recommends the idea of having a baby to nurture and take care of. He isn't against the idea, but shows a bit of worry of the thought of such a life-changing event as caring for a child, as any human would come to find with such a responsibility.
Yeah, come on. Let's head back to the car. I'll drive us to the nearest town and we'll try to sort this out there.
Harry, remember when we were talking about if we ever had children? If it was a girl, the name you liked.
I do. I liked Cheryl.
Cheryl.
This intro paints a well-crafted character development between these two, which is a nice touch that highlights their personalities and humanizes them, shifting 7 years later to the actual original opening, with Harry driving himself and Cheryl in his Jeep Wrangler to the town of Silent Hill. It shows how much of a concerned and humble dad Harry is with his gestures and glances towards Cheryl that is honestly wholesome with their interaction. The event that follows is of course the obligatory car crash where Harry wakes up in Silent Hill, as opposed to the other Silent Hill remake concept demo we took a look at earlier that didn't allow the player to interact or explore much of the town itself. Here, you are free to do so. As you can see, the developer who created the town itself is absolutely spot on. From the lonely foggy streets to the maze-like town itself, having to navigate through the thick fog while walking aimlessly feels very close to the original. I also love the callback to the fixed camera angles during the shift to the other world while in the back alleys. It's very well done and fits naturally while still encompassing this modern survival horror gameplay. The build-up leads to Harry being confronted by the Grey Childs and finding himself in Cafe 522, alongside the introduction to Sybil Bennett. It follows closely to the original scripts, but feels more personal given the tone they have when interacting with each other. They act like they should given the situation, and feel faithful to their characters' personalities.
I was on a trip with my daughter, but now she's missing. Have you seen her? She just turned 7 last month. Short black hair, blue dress.
I'm sorry. The only person I've seen in this town has been you.
So, what happened to this place? I mean, where is everyone?
I wish I knew.
From here, you receive the gun Sybil gives you, alongside with a flashlight, health drink, save point, and radio, as well as a little tutorial when it comes to accessing and managing your inventory, leading into combat with the air screamer. Admittedly, the combat is very awkward and clunky, odd even, such as when you aim down sights, the camera weirdly zooms into the gun as opposed to showing Harry's body as well. It's awkward to control and a bit difficult to move around. The inventory is also very rough in terms of its UI and presentation compared to the original, which looks more finished and polished, but it gets the job done. The highlight really is the town of Silent Hill itself. You can feel the unsettling nature with the ambience that is present with your exploration throughout navigating the town. It feels close to home, with that fear of exploring the unknown where you want to understand where you are going and hope you are going in the correct direction, yet subconsciously, you know deep down that you are lost. But it also creates that relaxation in your exploration that gets you lost in this dreamlike atmosphere with the soothing ambience. It's a nice touch that feels close to the original that I love so much. There is the objective of collecting the Eclipse keys to unlock the door that you access with the doghouse key, which also happens to be in the same locations you find in the original. But after finding all of them to access the door to the backyard to progress to Midwich Elementary School, that's unfortunately where the demo comes to an end. But overall, the quality seen in this fan remake was spot on to the original that paid close tribute and attention to the detail, that was faithful enough to honestly feel like a concept of what an actual Silent Hill 1 remake would look like if we got it instead of Silent Hill 2 remake.
And Mr. Mason, I hope you'll find your daughter quickly.
Thanks, officer. Sybil.
This has been a journey, exploring, and playing many of these very weird and odd Silent Hill fan games, but I would be lying to myself if I didn't admit that they were such a creative and unique idea that added lots of variety to each individual fan game. They express so much love, care, and passion seen in every project here that highlighted how compassionate the Silent Hill community truly is when it comes to building and developing new ideas and possibilities for the fandom with such fan games like these. I would have never come to find the mere existence of these games if I hadn't one day thought of the idea, but I'm glad that I did. For those of you interested, I'll leave a link to each and every one of these games in the description below for you to download and play for yourself. They are all free, so if you have time out of your day for yourself, then reserve it by experiencing these weird little fan games. Anyways, that's me. Thank you for watching. Please have a great day. Stay safe. And goodbye.
Thank you.